Darts, the big magic. Like when I started sewing, if I saw that this pattern has a dart in it, I would not choose it. So I would just find something without a dart, because darts were always kind of scary and I don't know why and what, and so it was always kind of a big no for me. Now I do like darts because they really contour your body very nicely. And if we had just a straight piece of a fabric and we would put it onto a rounded shape somehow, you know, then we have all these gatherings of extra material somewhere, and we don't want that. We want things to really look smooth and straight over the contour of a body. So for example, for this future jacket, I have 2 darts from the shoulder down to the bust point, and I stitched that in place, and then like this is the inside, what you can see now. So first I stitched that in place, and then I cut the extra material away and ironed it flat. And this is what you need to do when you have a very voluminous fabric, like something that is really a lot of has a lot of volume, and you don't want like extra material layered on top. So that would be a possibility of a dart. Or for a skirt, you know, we have those darts, like usually here from the waist down, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, that would contour around the belly area. So we always, you know, like with a straight piece of fabric, it would never really look that great if you want to have it fitted. So, and that's for the fitting process, like that's why we need darts. And it is kind of very interesting how many different kinds of darts there are. And I want to show you 3 of the most important ones. One is the pointed dart, like for example here. Then the one pointed dart with a volume fabric, like what I did here on this jacket. And then also a waist dart or a 2-pointed dart that we use usually in this area here for a dress or for, you know, like a jacket that is very tailored. And like just imagine we have the hips here, we have the bust here, and this area here has a lot of fabric, but we want to kind of have that tailored, but it's the most tailored part is basically in the center, and then it would kind of go to the point above and below that centered point. So this is our 2-pointed dart that has the 2 dart points here, and it would kind of like make a nice shape around the body. So I will show you all those 3 darts, and then you can try them in a little exercise. So basically there are 3 different kinds of darts, and I want to show all 3 of them and what's the typical scenario of each of them, and then also show an example for each of the 3 main darts. So the first one is the single point dart that we see very often in skirts or pants. You know, they are usually on or around the waist and face downwards in a way, and they contour kind of the belly area and the back area. So a single point dart is mainly, and I will just make a little dart here on my piece of muslin. So let's say we use this area here as the top of our garment, and from there we have the dart. So the dart is usually defined by several different things, one of which is the dart width. So let's say our single point dart is 2 inches wide and 8 inches long. So I mark here 2 inches wide and then 8 inches long. So I'll go here. First of all, I take the center of the 2 here, and then from the center I go down 8 inches. And that is down to this point here. And that point down there we call the apex. And the apex is our dart point. So this is where the dart will end. And it is very important to have that apex right below the center of our dart width here. And then we connect our apex with our end of dart points here. And what you can do, it's not really necessary so much, but just for the sake of it, I will give this dotted line just for later when I'm sewing and ironing. So what we also have here, so these are the dart legs. So I'll just write that down. So we have the dart legs, these are those 2 here, the end points, and then the apex. Very often when we deal with darts, we also use our awl. And the awl is a very pointy, sharp tool that you can poke through pattern paper and fabrics. And when you, for example, have a paper pattern on a fabric, it's kind of tricky to mark that apex point with, you know, like your chalk or anything else. So what do? You usually mark them with your awl. And the problem is that marking it with an awl means you're poking through the fabric. And if that is right on your apex, then you have a little hole there. So we don't want that to happen. So that's why if we mark our apex with the awl, we are always marking it 1/2 inch in. Like 1/2 inch away from the actual point is our apex. So if you mark it with the ruler, I mean, I do it like freehand basically, along that center line, 1/2 inch up from there is our apex point. And that's what I mark with my awl. So I create a hole in there. Later on, when we sew this dart, you know, the seam will cover it up, so there is no hole to see. And like every professional seamstress knows that when they sew a dart, they see the hole and they know I have to go another 1/2 inch further. So it's always another 1/2 inch beyond that point. Nobody will end sewing at that point. So it is industry knowledge. So you always go 1/2 inch beyond. So let's just write the details. So this is 2 inch wide and 8 inch long. I'll just write it down for my own sake. So this is the single point dart that is the most simple one and the most often used one. So then the next one is a dart when you have a very thick fabric. So we just give the same measurements, and it is basically the same procedure. So we do 2 inches wide, so that's the center point, and we go 8 inches down from the center point. From here, 8 inches. So I'll do a dotted line. And then we connect the apex point with our dart end point. And so far it looks exactly the same And I will show you when I'm on my sewing machine then and finishing up that that dart, then I will show you the difference. So again, we have the apex point here. I will mark it with my awl. So I poke a hole in there. Perfect. And then the third dart is a double pointed dart. And it looks a little different because, as I said, it's a double point. So it goes out, you know, on both sides basically. And let's say we do one that is 2 inches wide and 6 inches long. Or also let's do 8. So then they are all the same. So we do it 8 inches long. And since it's the middle, so it's from this dart point to that dart point. And the center is at 4. And we said 2 inches wide. So I go 1 inch on each side. So it's to here and to there. So now I have those 4 points and I will connect them. A little rough around my kitchen table here. But it's okay. So those darts with a double point are used mostly when you have longer tops or dresses, and these are around the waist area so that it gets a little narrower on the waist and then a little wider underneath the waist. So let's put the dart points again with the awl, like 1/2 inch from each end here and 1/2 inch from this end. So I have the 2 of those now. And I also have 8 inches length and 2 inches wide. Okay, so now we will go over to the sewing machine and I will show you how to sew a dart. When you sew like the double pointed one, you don't really sew to the point and then switch over to the other point. You kind of make a little curve here, kind of taking away that outermost edge. So you round that a little bit because we don't want any edges. So that's the only adjustments here. And then I will go over to the sewing machine and we'll stitch them together. Our single pointed dart is the first one that we have here on our muslin. So we will sew that together now. And at first we have to align them right and then we do the sewing. And the alignment would be that we fold the dart right in the center where I have that dotted line. Fold it perfectly in the middle here. Okay, all the way to the end. And then that would align my 2 marked black lines perfectly on top of each other. So that is the goal, to have those 2 dart legs perfectly matching. So, and when we have this achieved, we can pin it together. I don't overpin, as you know, but what I do is that I will put in a pin at the apex just to give me a warning sign that it is really here that the dart has to end. So as you can see, I have those 2 pins lengthwise along the seam, and then this is perpendicular in a 90-degree angle towards our seam. So it's a warning, you know, like it just tells me that this is where the dart really has the apex. Okay, now I will stitch those together. Usually you stitch them in the same color as your fabric, so it's not so visible, but I chose black thread, so it's a little easier to see. So now I come towards an end, and I'm not just continuing in a straight line towards that point here. I come down and then I rearrange my fabric slightly so that the last few stitches are parallel to that corner here. So I'm not going all the way to that end, because what we don't want to have in a dart is that they are pointy and then the garment is kind of looks like a tent, or like Madonna in the 80s, you know, the Madonna bra kind of thing in the 80s. So we don't want that. So that's why I parallel my seam for the last 2-3 seams here. 2-3 stitches. So I take it out without backing up at the end. So what I want to do now at the end, and that's really like a very traditional classic way to do. So you are at the end here and you have both of your threads, and then you knot them together without having the backing up to do, which would add bulk and extra stitches in that area, and we don't want that. So we just put 2 or 3 knots here. 1, 2, 3. And then I cut it short. And you can leave, you know, like a 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 of an inch of the thread. It doesn't really matter. And then we cut the top here. And this is basically our first dart. So when we look at it from the inside now, it's a very long dart, you know. So you can see that the end of it is more like rounded here, and it would go over a rounded area way better than if we would have stitched it all the way to the end and then we had this pointy, you know, like really pointy thing sticking out. So we don't want that. So the next step is to iron that dart, and I will just iron it to one side. There is a general rule, like if you have a dart at like a skirt or a pant, you always iron it to the outside, towards your side seam. Don't iron it towards the center, because we don't want any more fabric and a triple layer of fabric towards the center of it. So, and I will do that right here. So here is my dart that I just finished. And you would just pull it apart a little bit and then move the material over to one side and iron it down. So another trick that I know from way back then is or another, like a challenge that sometimes you have when you have very thin fabric and you iron that down, then you turn it over, then you see, or like where the dart is, it's kind of this little wave here, or a step, because your dart material is too thick. So you can avoid that. So I put a piece of paper underneath here, and then I iron my dart down. Okay, and by doing that, you remove the paper, and then you cannot see anything from the front. So it does not kind of give that impression or this embossed feeling here that there is a dart underneath. So this is what we will do with our second dart, the dart for thicker fabrics. I will sew it the exact same way, and then the finish up will be a little different. So here is my second dart that I did exactly like the first one, but we just imagine that we have now a very thick material, and we don't want to have like 3 layers of a very thick material on our, you know, like skirt or pants or jacket or whatever you do. So this one, as I said, we will pretend to be very thick. And what I will do, I will cut away that extra material here that kind of bulges out. And I will cut it in a way that I just leave maybe 1/4 inch of material on next to my dart seam. Cut it all the way to the, as far as I have my 1/4 inch. So I cut away that extra, as you can see, and then I iron it apart from each other. So that will be just pressing that apart, and then press the seam down as I go. So it's all the way pressed apart up to the seam, the apex. So in that way, you know, you don't add bulge to our material here. Here you can see now it's a very thin area where it's just plain flat and not just a big dart area like moved over to one side. So this is what you do with a very thick fabric. And now the last one, the double pointed one, I will just fold in the center here. The same what I did with the others, but now I have 2 apex points. I will center it, give it a press. And then I will stitch from one apex point all the way to the other one. So here we have our last, like the double pointed dart, and I stitched it the same way as I would stitch the other 2. So the first 2-3 stitches are straight, then I go and do the diagonal line here. I round off that corner a little bit, so it's not one point, one edge. And then the same at the end, I do 2 straight stitches, and then I knot both of those ends. So some books refer also that you start here in the center and you sew towards the apex, and then you start at the center again and continue to this apex. I happen to not realize any difference if you do a one seam or like two seams from the center on outwards. So it's really up to you. I mean, you can try it, and some people really are very strong-minded about doing it the right way, like from the center to the apex. So then it's time for the ironing of this kind of dart, which is a little more weird or tricky, and because of that we want to just cut in our dart here a few times, and I cut out kind of little triangles so that it can lay better, and I cut it all the way maybe up to 1/4 of an or 1/8 of an inch towards the seam. So not all the way to the seam. So now it's a little easier to fold that over to one side and iron it down. And same thing, if you have a very, very fine material, put the paper underneath. You can do that. If you have a very, very thick material, you cut the extra material and center it. Okay, so I have it flat towards one side, and when you look at it from the front, so this is how it would look, and it doesn't really do justice now to see a flat piece here with that dart in the middle, but I will hold it up to our mannequin and then you can see why we are doing this and what we are doing here. Okay, but that's pretty much it, and thank you for watching.